I met Dasan Sanim in 1979, and I had already been practicing Zen for about 4 years, and I was living in a very small, rural, the guy was running it at that time almost like a monastery. We were doing one 7-day retreat a month, and some people from Empty Gate were coming up to where I was living, which is about 4 hours north of Berkeley, and we're doing solo retreats. And they left a flyer for a 7-day retreat with Zen Master Bon. And I was going through a very miserable time. I was very, very unhappy, and I was going through a very bad day. And I hopped in my truck, and I didn't even know where I was going. I was going to visit a friend, and I said, no, I better go sit at a retreat. So I turned back, went home, and called Empty Gate Zen Center, and they said there was room, so I drove right down to Empty Gate Zen Center. The retreat started on a Sunday, and Zen Master Bon showed up on Wednesday. And actually, he got there at night, and I had already gone to bed, and somebody knocked on the door and said, Zen Master Bon is down in the hot tub, and why don't you go down? And there were about 20 people in the hot tub. It was a big hot tub. And that was the first time I met him. For me, it was wonderful. I liked my teachers a little bit wild, and he was a little bit wild. He was, if I remember right, he was pointing at the stars, and he was like right in the middle, and there were 20 people all around. And he just kind of held court there for about an hour, I guess. And I kind of enjoyed that. And then I had a few interviews with him during the retreat, and I moved into the Zen Center at the end of the retreat. Let's see. Like I said, I came into the Zen Center in 1979. I got Inca in 1992. Zen Master Bon used to come he would spend 3 months on the East Coast, 3 months on the West Coast, and then I suppose he was going to Europe too, but I wasn't really aware of that. And he would come to Berkeley once a month when he was on the West Coast. So I got to know him a little bit. I'd pick him up at the airport sometimes, and I lived at the Zen Center for about 5.5 years, and I would just show up for all the retreats, and became a Dharma teacher, and then became a director, and then after a while the abbot moved out, so in 1984 I became the abbot. I started answering questions on Wednesday nights, which I still do, 30 some odd years later. And I just kept having interviews with him, and then one of the Jiddo Popsanims moved to the West Coast, and I would practice with him when Dasan Sanim wasn't around. But I would just keep working with them, and then finally I was actually going to leave the school. I solved I answered the mouse eats cat food Kangan, and I literally went to Los Angeles to quit. And I walked into the room, and before I opened my mouth, he said, maybe become Jiddo Popsanim necessary. So I thought about it, and I said, okay. So we waited about 1.5 years after that, and then I got Inca in 1992, in December. It'll be 25 years this December. I think I was a little fed up with the structure, with the Kangans actually, it's funny you're asking me, I don't really remember, but there were a number of times over the years that I thought of leaving, and each time it was uncanny actually that Dasan Sanim would come up to me and answer the question before I asked it to him. There were some difficulties in the Sangha, and I didn't like some of the ways things were responded to, so one time I was going to leave. And I actually came here to tell him I was leaving, and when I got here, I had heard that it was resolved. And so he came up to me in the hallway, not knowing really anything that I was thinking about. And he said, "Do we have a problem?" And I said, "Not anymore." And he said, "Good," and he walked away. So that was the kind of relationship I had with him. We didn't talk a lot. He didn't know me all that well. Although one time I asked him, I said, this was in an interview, and I said to him, I said, "Zen Master, do I have to tell you about myself, or do you already understand?" And he said, "I already understand." So 5 years later, I went in to interview, and I said, "So 5 years ago, I said to you, do I have to tell you about myself, or do you already understand?" And you said, "I already understand." So I took that to mean that if you have any problem with what I'm doing or anything to say to me, you will. Otherwise, I'll do what I please. And he peered at me and he said, "Of course, only don't check." And that was the kind of relationship I had with him. He didn't have a lot to say to me. Even when I drive him around, I was young. I was a little intimidated by him. He wouldn't talk that much. I tried to make conversation with him. But I felt a closeness. And I loved his energy. I loved his wildness. Somebody asked me about it earlier today. And being with him, it always felt that everything was a little bit surrealistic. We'd be laughing, everything was funny. It was as if he would turn everything a little bit sideways. So reality seemed bent, and I enjoyed that immensely. So I always liked my time being with him. For me, Zen Master Soeng was totally alive. He was present, he was alive, he was unpredictable, he was spontaneous, and that's what I was attracted to. So as taking him as my teacher, I responded to that kind of energy. So in some ways you can say that's not necessarily our basic teaching that we might say, but for me that's the heart of the matter. The spontaneity, the aliveness. I'm not the kind of student who will cloister himself away. I don't do long retreats. I've done a couple of them, but generally I like the everydayness of our practice at Empty Gate Zen Center, and probably most Zen centers in the school. We have retreats all the time. There's either a 3-day or a 1-day retreat every month. So there's a rhythm of retreat, being out in the world, retreat, daily practice, that I respond to, even more so than the longer retreats. Well, if a new student comes to me, first of all, I'll probably tell him, if this style and the energy of this Sangha appeals to you, stay here. If it doesn't, go somewhere else, because where I live, there are about as many Zen centers as there are people. Not just Zen centers, but all sorts of Buddhism. And so I don't really encourage people to stay if it doesn't speak to them. But to me, being alive, expressing your nature, it's like the oneness of all beings, but also the individuality of each person. You know, we're all, I think, at crossroads of time and space. We're born into this world. And to me, this practice says, find out who you are and be that. So there's a kind of spontaneity and aliveness. It's not about being somebody else. Zen Master Soeng didn't seem to try to make us be like him. It was more like find yourself and give that as the gift that you have to the world. And that's what we offer. Daesan Sanim left us well before he died. So by the mid-90s, he wasn't around all that much. Like, we bought our property in 1996, and he came one time for an opening ceremony in 1997. But after that, he wasn't around that much. So by the time he died, it felt like we were already on our own. I think in answer to your question, it was his encouragement to live my life fully. And I think that happened all along the way. I don't think there's one particular example of it. It's just I never felt that I needed to be anything other than who I was. But his admonition was, really find out who you are and don't be attached to your idea of who you are, but express yourself. Now, I'm sure I'm twisting that in what worked for me. I'm sure other people would say, oh no, he didn't teach like that. But that's how it felt to me. Well, it's interesting because I'm involved in our teachers group nationally. I'm on the executive board, so I'm pretty involved in the running of the school. But actually, to me, the life of the school happens at the local Zen Center level. So it really is, for most of the students of the school, their connection is with their local Zen Center. And I teach mostly on the West Coast, so most people will never come to Providence, and they know of the Quantum School because they're either members of it, because they're members of Empty Gate, or like when I travel to other Zen centers, they know I'm coming because I'm a member of the Quantum School of Zen and they're members. But they have very little contact with the school in general. So it seems to me strengthening the life of the Zen centers, really supporting the practice and helping people stay committed and stay focused at the Zen center level is the most important thing. Well, there's 5 of us on the executive board, and one person is nominally the head of it, and he actually does a lot of the work in between meetings. But generally we meet once a month over phone, I guess, and whatever the issues are financially, there's been a number of Zen centers trying to buy property, and we've had to discern whether the school could support that. Just the various, I should remember better than I am. Well, there are more teachers. A lot of the original Sangha is getting older. Slowly there are new people coming into the school. There are younger people who are starting to join us. But I think we have the issue of people getting older, and will there be younger people to carry on the Zen Center after we older folks stop? I think for me personally, it's just I've been teaching for 25 years, and I'm also a psychotherapist, so I meet with people a lot. There's a little bit of maybe needing a rest, and there really isn't time for a rest, so it's hard work. As a teacher, I'm on retreat every month. I'm either doing a retreat at Empty Gate, or I'm traveling to, I think the last time I saw you in Cambridge. I go to Alaska once a year. I go to Boise, Idaho twice a year. I go to Los Angeles. So I'm always traveling around. I always have another plane ticket to buy. My wife is always saying goodbye to me and hello to me when I come back. So it's taxing. It's a lot of work, actually. And as a Zen teacher, it feels to me that you have a big responsibility, because people will come in and share their deepest questions, and I feel responsible once a relationship is formed to continue to be there, to show up. Yeah, maybe I'll answer that question about don't know mind. I think I have a little bit of a different take on it. Actually, a couple of things. When I am asked about don't know mind, I'll often use the words curiosity and wonder. It seems to me that what we're cultivating in our practice is a kind of openness, a willingness to challenge assumptions. And I know for myself, I just love it when I find out that I have an assumption and my assumption is wrong. And it happens very often. And I think that's a beautiful practice point. So for me, I'm most interested in bringing don't know mind into everyday life. Sometimes I'll talk about it as when we're in the Dharma room, it's a little bit like being at the gym, and that we're learning to identify an experience of not knowing. But it really comes alive when we can manifest it in our everyday life. So for me, I'm most interested is where practice and everyday life cross. So I'm less interested I do encourage people to sit longer retreats, but that's actually not where my focus is. It's more, how does it show up in your life, with your family, at your work, while you're at a ball game, and just in a very natural way, can you be open? And even like in these days in political and social issues, to be able to simultaneously have a point of view and passionately advocate for that point of view, and at the same moment realize that you really don't know, and that you stay open and you're always remembering that there's another point of view that will inform your own. My political and social action tend to be in my teaching and in my work as a psychotherapist. I think lately I've taken on the issue of racism and white privilege as a particular issue that I'm interested in, so that will come up in my Dharma talks. I look for it, I see it in my own life, and I look for it in the social fabric, and I try to illuminate that when I see it. But that's really just my personal issue. I'm not part of organizations that are advocating in those ways. Well, I'd probably say go ahead, see how it goes. Most of the time they come back. There's very few people that stay up on the mountain. Eventually they come back. And then I'm asking them, I'm encouraging them to be alive in the moment. That when you hear that sound, be alive to it. And when a situation arises, respond, express yourself. So you don't have to do anything special. You just go to your, I don't usually say it this way, but you can go to your don't know center. It's always there for you. I'm always encouraging people to breathe into their lower abdomen, to bring their energy down so they can actually be there and hold whatever energy there is, and then act, do something. And then pay attention to the results. See how it goes, and be willing to realize or to see where you were wrong. Be willing to look at what worked and what doesn't work, so that life is kind of like our playing field, and then there's a time to watch it, to look at it and see how it went, and to be honest in that evaluation. Being taped in this talk right now and not knowing what you're going to ask me, I can hear the judgments in my mind. Am I really giving them anything of value? And I'm remembering that's not my job. My job is to speak. They'll decide what to do. I mean, it's happening every moment. There are always moments of awe and wonder and curiosity. If I just think on a political level, It happened in 2008 when Obama was elected. It happened in 2016 when Trump was elected. I had a much different feeling in 2008 than I did in 2016. But each of those moments showed me something about myself. To me, once, it's not past tense, as we're expressing ourselves, as we're alive, curiosity and wonder is the food to make things interesting, to bring life to what happens. Certainty seems to make things dead. Uncertainty, curiosity, wonder bring things alive. And for me, this practice is a tool, a way of life that brings that to life. And that's what I'm interested in, is the actual aliveness of it, not so much the idea of it. I can spin a theory. I have a lot of ideas on how things work. I think Buddhism has a wonderful structure to help us understand human suffering. But the magic is in the moment of being alive. And that's what I'm always interested in tasting. And I suppose, bringing it full circle, that's why I was so attracted to Zen Master Bon, because I saw it in him even before I fully understood it myself. We did a keto once at a place called Harbin Hot Springs, and it's kind of a somewhat local hot springs that, in the old days, we would have called it a hippie place. But we did this keto, and we rented a building, and about, I don't know, what feels now about 10 Bosolnims from Los Angeles came to the keto with us, probably about 6. And the hot tubs were naked. So they didn't want to go into the hot tubs naked. So Zen Master Bon sent me into the office to tell them that they needed to close down the hot springs so that these women could go in by themselves. And I said, I'm not going to do that. He said, yes, you are. And I did, and they laughed at me, and they said, no, we don't do that. You know, they probably had 60, 70, 100 other people there. So I don't remember exactly where Zen Master Bon fit into this, but the Korean women were undaunted. At one point, they all went to the hot springs. They stripped down to their underwear and they jumped in, and we were everybody was laughing, and Zen Master Bon was just laughing in hysterics, and it was all just fun. Again, to me, the word was alive. And I don't think any of those women would have imagined they were going to do that. And I was there to witness it, so it wasn't that only women were there. So it was things like that. Yeah, I've got a few other stories, but that's probably the neatest one to tell. He was a comedian. He would tell stories, and everybody would be in hysterics. They asked for a tribute for him when he turned 60, and what I wrote was something like, if he hadn't been a Zen master, he could have been a comedian in Las Vegas. He was that funny. He told stories better than anybody I'd ever heard tell stories. I only wish I remembered all the stories that he told, because his teaching was so much through storytelling. He didn't tell us so much as tell us these stories that we would just be laughing, but we'd get the message. He was a master at that.